Section 2 of The Psychology of Peoples by Gustav Le Bon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. The Limits of the Variability of the Character of Races. The variability of the character of races, and not its fixity, constitutes the apparent rule. Reasons for this appearance: invariability of the fundamental characteristics and variability of the secondary characteristics. Analogies between the psychological characteristics and the irreducible and modifiable characteristics of the animal species. It is only environment, circumstances, and education that influence the accessory psychological characteristics. The possibilities of character, examples furnished by the different periods, the men of the Terror, what they became at different periods, how national characteristics endure in spite of revolutions, various examples, conclusion. It is only by a careful study of the evolution of civilizations that the fixity of the mental constitution of races is brought home to the observer. At first sight it is variability and not fixity that appears to be the general rule. The history of peoples might induce the belief that their soul undergoes on occasion very rapid and very far-reaching transformations. Does there not seem, for example, to be a very considerable difference between the character of an Englishman of the time of Cromwell and that of a modern Englishman? Does not the circumspect and subtle Italian of the present day seem a very different being from the fierce and impulsive Italian described in the memoirs of Benvenuto Cellini? Not to go so far afield and to confine ourselves to France, how numerous are the apparent changes of character in the course of a few centuries, and even at times in the course of a few years. What historian has not remarked the difference between the French national character of the 17th and 18th centuries, and in modern times can anything seem more distinct than the character of the ferocious conventionalists and that of the docile slaves of Napoleon? And yet they were the same men, though in the space of a few years they seem to have changed entirely. To elucidate the causes of these changes, we will remind the student in the first place that a psychological species is formed, as is an anatomical species, of a very small number of irreducible fundamental characteristics around which are grouped accessory characteristics which are modifiable and changeable. The breeder who transforms the apparent structure of an animal, or the gardener who modifies the aspect of a plant to such a degree that it is unrecognizable to the unpractised eye, has not affected to the slightest extent the fundamental characteristics of the species. All they have done has been to influence the accessory characteristics. In spite of all the artifices employed, the fundamental characteristics always tend to reappear with each new generation. The mental constitution possesses fundamental characteristics as immutable as the anatomical characteristics of animal species, but it also possesses accessory characteristics that are easily modified. It is these latter characteristics that may easily be changed by environment, circumstances, education, and various other factors. It must also be remembered, and the point is essential, that we all possess in our mental constitution certain possibilities of character which circumstances do not always provide with an opportunity of manifesting themselves. When they come to the front, a new and more or less ephemeral personality at once takes shape. It is in this way that at times of great political or religious crisis, momentary changes of character are observed which would seem to indicate that manners, ideas, conduct, everything, in short, had undergone a change. Everything has indeed changed, as happens to the tranquil surface of a lake lashed by a storm, but it is rare that the change is lasting. It is in consequence of these possibilities of character put in operation by certain exceptional events that the actors in great religious and political crises appear to us to be made of superior stuff to ourselves, to be a sort of giants of whom we are the degenerate sons. In reality, they were men like ourselves in whom circumstances had given free rein to possibilities of character possessed by all of us. Take, for example, the giants of the Convention, who held Europe in check and sent their adversaries to the guillotine for mere contradiction. At bottom, they were respectable, pacific citizens like ourselves, who in ordinary times would probably have led the most tranquil and retired existence in their studies or behind their counters. Extraordinary events caused the vibration of certain of their brain cells, which under usual conditions would not have been called into activity, and they developed into those colossal figures whom posterity is at a loss to understand. Born 100 years later, Robespierre would doubtless have been an upright magistrate, on excellent terms with the local priest. Fouquier Tinville, a magistrate possessing, perhaps in rather a higher degree than his colleagues, the harshness and supercilious manners of his profession, but greatly appreciated for his zeal in bringing delinquents to book. Saint Just would have made an excellent schoolmaster, esteemed by his chiefs and very proud of the decoration he would certainly have ended by obtaining. To remove all doubt as to the accuracy of these provisions, it is sufficient to note what Napoleon accomplished with such of the ferocious terrorists as had not the time to cut off mutually each other's heads. The majority of them became staid officials, tax collectors, magistrates or prefects. The waves stirred up by the storm of which we spoke above had calmed down, and the troubled lake had recovered its tranquil surface. Even in the most troubled periods, in those which produced the strangest variations of personality, it is easy to trace the fundamental characteristics of the race beneath the new developments. Was there much difference in reality between the centralised dictatorial and despotic regime of our strict Jacobins and the centralised dictatorial and despotic regime to which 15 centuries of monarchy had accustomed the French nation? All the revolutions of the Latin peoples result in this obstinately recurring regime, in this incurable need of being governed, because it represents a sort of synthesis of the instincts of the race. It was not solely the glamour attaching to his victories that enabled Bonaparte to make himself master of France. When he transformed the Republic into a dictatorship, the hereditary instincts of the race manifested themselves day by day with greater intensity. Indeed, in the absence of an officer of genius, any adventurer might have filled his part. 50 years later, the heir to his name had only to show himself to obtain the votes of a people tired of liberty and eager for servitude. It was not the 18th Brumaire that established the fortunes of Napoleon, but the soul of his race, which he was about to trample beneath his iron heel. Footnote, "At this gesture," writes Taine, "the French bowed in obedience, and they persisted in their attitude, as if it were their natural condition. The humble, the soldiers and the peasants, with animal fidelity; the great, the dignitaries and functionaries, with Byzantine servility. The republicans offered no resistance. On the contrary, it was among them that he found the best instruments of his reign. His senators, deputies, state councillors, judges and officials of every rank. Beneath their talk of liberty and equality, he had been quick to divine their dictatorial instincts, their need of commanding, of surpassing their fellows, and even subsidiarily, and in addition, their hungering after wealth and pleasure. Between the delegates of the Committee of Public Safety and the minister, the prefect or the sub-prefect of the empire, the difference is slight. The man is the same, and it is only the costume that is altered. The carmagnole has been exchanged for an embroidered uniform." End of footnote. The influence exerted on men by environment appears so great because it operates on the accessory and transitory elements, or on those possibilities of character which we have been speaking. In reality, the changes are not very profound. The mildest man, driven by hunger, attains to a degree of ferocity which renders him capable of every crime, and even leads him occasionally to devour his fellow man. Will it be said on this account that his habitual character has definitely changed? If the conditions of civilization procure a minority extreme wealth, and develop in its members all the vices which are the inevitable consequence of luxury, if they arouse violent desires in the remainder of the population without supplying the means of satisfying them, the result will be general discontent and unrest, which will influence conduct and provoke upheavals of every kind. But amid this discontent and these upheavals, the fundamental characteristics of the race will always show themselves. In the past, the English-born inhabitants of the United States, when engaged in civil war, displayed the same indomitable energy as they exhibit today in founding towns, universities, and manufactories. The national character has not been modified. It is merely the objects that bring it into play that have changed. When examining in succession the various factors capable of influencing the mental constitution of peoples, we always observe that their influence is exerted on the accessory and transitory sides of character, while they scarcely affect the fundamental elements, or only affect them as the result of very slow hereditary accumulations. We do not conclude from what precedes that the psychological characteristics of peoples are invariable, but only that they possess, like the anatomical characteristics, a high degree of fixity. It is on account of this fixity that the soul of races changes so slowly during the course of ages. End of section 2.